Welcome back to Stonehard Sports. The first round just concluded. Actually concluded for me as I'm recording this yesterday. But I do like to get the first round grades out after the second and third round, because I think it gives you a little bit more context. Maybe if you liked a player, but the team took maybe a position that you thought they didn't really need, but they grabbed that position with maybe a steal later on, it potentially changes your view on the first round pick. So I like to wait until then, because some grades slightly moved based on what the teams did later on. But for majority, I'd say my feelings for what had happened are reflected in these grades, which it was a pretty crazy draft, I would say. I think this class in general is definitely the one that I've followed the most so far, just from the history of following football my whole life. And I think, offensively, it could be one of the better ones, just not even in recent memory, just in general, which, I know that's high praise, but with the amount of tackles that went off the board and were good, quarterbacks in the top 12, the first 12 picks, half of them were quarterbacks, and the receivers, and there's still so many good receivers left, and there were a ton of good players that went in the second round. Obviously, some positions are lacking, but I think the class itself could look pretty good, and the first round is what a lot of people look at, and it was a very fun first round. So obviously, you see the first overall pick here. We're just going to go down all 32 picks, and I'm going to go ahead and give you my rankings for them. And starting off with Caleb Williams, it is pretty easy. Has to be an A+. I think with just, I know I want to save some of the A+ for like, hey, this is just very good value. But I think if it's like, hey, this is the right pick, they're going to be a stud. They have a very high ceiling, not like a very high floor as well. I think you could be fine putting an A+ there. But Caleb is an A+. I think it's pretty easy. He will be, I think, the best quarterback they've ever had. I think the people that are just saying whatever they want, obviously on social media, are going to look really dumb, which no one's going to go ahead and find tweets of random people and look, hey, you said this about Caleb Williams, because no one gives a crap about their opinion anyways. But I think just the people that hate him are just going to look stupid in their inner circles of friends, So don't be that guy, because if you hate Caleb Williams, you're going to look pretty dumb. He's going to be a stud. He's insanely talented. Yes, he makes some crazy throws from time to time and is just not as cohesive as you would like. He doesn't play within the system all the time. He likes to get out of the pocket, do some crazy stuff. Sometimes it just works, man. And sometimes on third down, that's what you need. You're like, hey, quarterback, just get us this thing, man, all right? And Caleb can do that. And now with some crazy weapons that he has, and the defense looks pretty good, and it was good last year, again, only thing that concerns me is just the infrastructure that he's in with the organization. But I would say their GM has installed a changing kind of culture there in Chicago. And the coach, I would say he was obviously close to being fired last year, just barely saved his job at the end of the year. If they don't do amazing, will he be gone? The answer is probably yes. So I think just the play calling not being super proven, and the coach maybe having been on the hot seat concerns me a little bit, but I think Caleb's talent will prevail. This is an A+ pick for me. Next, we have the Washington Commanders, and they, as we expected, took Jaden Daniels with the second overall pick. Now, I'm going to give this a B+. And now I know you're thinking, hey, why isn't this an A+, A-? It's because I think I can't give a team an A if I don't think they made the right pick. And I don't think Jaden Daniels is the right pick. Now, is it a bad pick? No. That's why it's a B+. It's not a bad pick. I would say you could go based on like B or B- is like, hey, this is fine. Like, this is good. There's stuff I could say that's not great. There's stuff I could say that is great, and it doesn't pull me one way or the other. I think this does pull me in B+ because it is a position that they needed, obviously, in quarterback, and he's a talented player. He is. He had a phenomenal year. Obviously, he won the Heisman. Insane. It's just when you compare the prospects between, obviously, Drake May is more built for the NFL. He has a better arm. he had nothing to work with at UNC. Jaden Daniels had 2 receivers that went in the first round. And I think the infrastructure at LSU was just so much better than UNC. And Drake May still had a good year. He still was good. And he's been good for 2 years. And he's 2 years younger. Whereas Jaden Daniels was throwing the football to Brandon Ayuk versus, Justin Herbert during COVID in college. Like, he's an older guy. And I think it does fit with a team that seems to want to win now. They spend a ton of money in free agency, so that does make sense. But I think they are comparing him to like an RG3. I think that does make sense. I would say Jaden, just in terms of his style, I know people say dual threat. I would say he's like a quarterback that he can't throw the deep ball, obviously. The deep ball was his biggest thing. But throwing over the middle was a little bit of a hurdle to jump over. And he doesn't really throw on the run a ton. Like, if it's not there, he's kind of just rolling out of the pocket and he's running, which he's obviously great at. But he takes some really big hits and he's a little bit slender. He's still a good prospect. He still is. But number 2 overall pick over a guy like Drake May, I don't think that was the right pick personally, but it's not bad, and it'll be very interesting to see how this top 3 kind of goes and just the quarterbacks beyond that. But I'm going to go ahead and give it a B+. And then we go to Drake May for the Patriots, and I'm going to give this one an A+, because I think you could say this was a steal, because I think Commanders should have taken Drake May, because I think he is the better quarterback. Now, with him going to the Patriots, does that worry me? Yeah, a little bit. It does a little bit, because obviously we know what their team looks like right now, but I do want to say I don't want to judge a book by its cover too much, because we thought this with the Texans. We were like, hey, they're drafting CJ Stroud. He's like a higher floor, lower ceiling-ish quarterback. He can still be obviously very good. But the team around him isn't amazing, so it might start off rough. And that wasn't the case. It changed very quickly. So maybe a former player, just like the Texans, defensive coach, just like the Texans, get this rookie quarterback, and maybe it all kind of comes together, and they end up being really good. I think what they do the rest of the draft determines a lot. As I'm recording this, they did finish the 2nd and 3rd round. Receiver, I like who they got. Tackle, that was just such a bad pick. So starting off good and bad. But I think in the end, the Patriots won't regret not trading down. Again, I think a lot of people hate Drake May, not because they watched football. That's for sure. It's just not. And they just don't really know NFL and what NFL teams draft and what is valued in the traits and how the draft works and how just NFL in general and football works. They just don't know if they hate Drake May. And I think it's because if you're going to ask someone why they don't like Drake May, it's going to be because of a superfluous reason or because he went to UNC and blah, 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 blah. And it's just dumb reasons. It's very dumb. He's a total stud. He just makes other throws that other players can't. He's just like Caleb in terms of that way. I do think Caleb is better and was a good pick at number 1. Now, similar to Caleb was erratic at times, and Drake May kind of was too. Caleb more to an extent, because he can do stuff that is just borderline basically with Mahomes. But I think May was panicked in the pocket a lot, obviously. But that was because his O-line sucked, and I don't think he had a lot of good receivers. Again, I don't think the stuff around him was good. It was bad, and he still had a good year. So I think this is going to be a great pick. They're not going to regret it. This is an A+. And then we'll go to Marvin Harrison Jr. Not a ton to say here. This was an A+ as well, because I think he was arguably the best or second best player in the class. He's guaranteed going to be a Pro Bowl, just perennial wide receiver, all-pro caliber wide receiver. I'm glad that they did this and did not trade, which maybe the trade stuff was just kind of all a smoke. I don't think it was all smoke screen the whole time with the JJ stuff, but I think the Vikings and the Giants were trying to get Drake, because they also understand. And the Patriots, just didn't get enough in their eyes to get that done. But with Marvin, total stud. They needed a receiver. This is an easy. Joe Alt was the pick for the Chargers at 5. I'm going to give this one an A. There were some people that apparently were freaking out because they were like, oh my God, we need a receiver. Like, this is horrible. Again, just casual fans. Again, I want to hopefully get to the point to where my audience is not casual fans. Obviously, casual fans are fine because they're everywhere. But if you come in here being a casual fan, I want to try and educate you to try and learn the nuances of NFL and the value of all of the stuff that comes with the NFL draft. And with the Chargers, they want to run the ball, and they want to come in with the new team and build their team through the trenches from the inside out. And Joe Alt was the best tackle on the board. He just was. And it makes sense. I'm very glad they did this and not Latham. I think this is a much better pick than J.C. Latham. And I know a lot of people wanted Neighbors, but I think getting Joe Alt and then getting the stuff they got later on, like Ladd McConkey in the second round, I think that's better than getting Malik Neighbors here and then a tackle later, because all the tackles went in the first round because it's a very valuable position. So I think they played their cards right. This was good, and I'm going to give it an A. It's not an A+ because it wasn't a steal or anything, and he's going to have to switch, I believe, to the left or right side, one of the two. So it'll take some time there, but it's still a great pick. It's an A. And that is the same with Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors is also an A. I'm glad they took him and did not take J.J. McCarthy. I think that they don't need to take a quarterback right now. That's just my opinion. I think it would have been fine. But at 6 with J.J., it just would have been too high. It just would have. And I think they needed some sort of just playmaking in general in that room. Malik Neighbors is just a big play waiting to happen. Now, I do think Odunze has a higher floor in terms of the receiver prospects, because Neighbors had some issues maybe playing on the outside a little bit in college, and he's kind of just got to be in the slot right now, and Wan'Dale Robinson also wants to be in the slot, so I guess Wan'Dale might end up being slightly phased out of the offense, or Neighbors is going to have to go outside a little bit more, but still, they needed receivers. And Daniel Jones, you still have him on that big deal, and you can get out of it, I believe, after this year. He had a good year when he had stuff going for him. I still don't fully believe in Daniel Jones, obviously, as a good quarterback. I think he's fine. But you have an out after next year. If you're really that bad, you can get a rookie, and he's going to be able to come in and potentially play with a potential superstar wide receiver. Again, not an A+ because it wasn't a crazy steal or anything, but we'll give it an A. Great pick. Next is going to be J.C. Latham. And this is going to be my lowest grade so far. I'm going to give it a C+. Now, I think this is because I just do not think he was the second best tackle available. And I think they could have had a lot more value if they traded down. And I'm also just not as high on J.C. Latham as other people. Definitely not at the 7th overall pick. Now, it's not a D or a C- or something like that, because it is a position of need at tackle, and they needed that. So that's good that they filled that position. But I think they kind of were very sticking to their guns, like, hey, we could just stay here and take this guy we really like. But I think trading down for a team that apparently a lot of people liked Penix, which we'll get to that pick next. But I think trading down and getting maybe just Latham anyways at maybe 10 or later, maybe the Raiders or Seahawks, I guess, if those teams wanted to trade up, or you could have got Mims at that point. And I think that would have been better value because you would have got more picks. So it's a C+. Again, just him as a player, like, he's huge, and he's, a good solid run blocker, but he wasn't amazing in the pass, and he wasn't just elite at anything in terms of runner pass. And I know you're like, oh, well, that's good then. He's balanced. But that's in college. If you're like that in the NFL, then that's good. But that doesn't mean it just immediately equals you're going to be that in college, because all the people are so much better. And he also was not a great athlete. He was just kind of big. So, it's good at a position of need, but I think they could have done better, and I'm kind of disappointed in their first-round decisions. But we'll give them a C+. And then we get to this stuff. I can't even – I was baffled when this happened. I could not believe it. I was just so shocked. This is not an F, but it's a D-. It's as close as you can freaking come. I mean, I don't get it at all. Now, I heard the people defending it of like, hey, look, this is fine. And obviously the GM was saying like, this is the Jordan Love plan. I don't know. Other people were like, hey, he's coming off an Achilles. He's older. Like, we, definitely still, like, it makes sense. Like, okay, there's rebuttals for all of that. One, you picked him at 8 overall. You could have traded back and just maybe gotten a different player, but maybe a team was really wanting Penix, apparently. Like, okay, that's fine. 2, you just signed Kirk Cousins. You just signed him. He hasn't played a single snap. 4 years, $180 million, $100 million guaranteed. There's not even an out out of the contract that's reasonable after like the second year at the minimum. So if you're like, hey, well, he's coming off an Achilles, we want to make sure we get a backup plan, then why did you sign him? If you loved Penix that much, why did you sign Kirk Cousins? Michael Penix didn't play a single down of football after Kirk Cousins signed. It's not like they signed Kirk and they were like, you know what, though? We do love Penix. He did this. He already did that before you signed Kirk. And to not tell him, I think that's terrible. I saw Stephen A saying, oh, it doesn't matter. Like, you got guaranteed money. You should just shut up. It's like, well, that's kind of interesting for a guy who stands up for NBA players all the times of getting their bag and making sure that they're all represented, or all these other people like coaches and stuff like that. I mean, if I'm a quarterback and you just sign me all this money and I'm like trying to help win, yeah, I think I would be confused and upset and distraught of like, you just wasted this pick. It's a waste. It won't be a useful pick for at the minimum 2 years. At the minimum. And talking about, if you want to compare it to Jordan Love, okay, the Packers traded back into the first round at the 28th pick and took Love, who was like 21, 22 years old, after they had Rodgers for like decade plus, who threatened to retire for 2 years and was coming off his worst season. And we all know what happened. It helped motivate him. He ended up having back-to-back MVP years. But it worked out for the Packers. But also for the Packers position, what if they used that pick instead of Jordan Love? What if they got guys that went after like T. Higgins or someone like that, or Antoine Winfield? What if they got a stud? Would that have maybe changed the Packers just 2 seasons, and could they have won the Super Bowl? It's possible. So I think the Packers, if they could do it again, sure, they would probably do the Love thing. But I'm saying there were even repercussions to that, because it was a first-round pick that wasn't helping you for 2 to 3 years. And Love sat for longer than I think a lot of people expected, and that he maybe could have needed. But, now they're obviously happy it worked out. The Falcons are taking a quarterback who is this year, going into this year, he will be the same age that Jordan Love was when he started his first season without Aaron Rodgers this past year, after having already sat for multiple years, like 3 years behind Aaron Rodgers. Penix will be the same age. And they also took him 20 spots higher at 8. It does not make sense. It's one of the craziest things that I've ever seen on draft night. Like, I cannot believe it. It's just, I don't get it. I just don't get it. It's not an F because he does have talent. But I also think number 8, if a team jumped up to get him at number 8, I still think that would be too high. He had 2 tackles, 2 offensive linemen get drafted day 1 and 2, and 2 receivers get drafted day 1 and 2. He had a great team around him. His coach just got hired at frickin' Alabama to go be the Alabama's head coach, because he's obviously clearly highly touted. And he had 4 season-ending surgeries the 4 years prior to this year. Like, he has a very good arm. He can throw the deep ball. He had issues throwing down the middle of the field, had great help. Now the Falcons have some great weapons. But if you sign Kirk to win right now, I don't understand why you would take Penix at 8. I don't. It makes no sense. One of the craziest picks I've ever seen, and it's a D-. I don't care. It's a D-. Next is Rome Odunze. Let's get a little bit more cheerful and happy in terms of grades. This is an A, borderline A+, but I'm going to give it an A. The value, I think, for the Bears was just too good at this spot. He was a top 6 player for me, and just, I think, obviously they did trade for Keenan Allen, and Rome Odunze is kind of similar to Keenan Allen, but their third receiver after Keenan Allen was not great, and I think the value was too good to where you're like, hey, we could still use a receiver, and he's just a total stud. And now the Bears probably have the best receiving core in the NFL for next year with their rookie quarterback coming in who has a super high ceiling. I mean, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen, and Cole Kmet. That's pretty insane. Now, I know people wanted O-line, and I was kind of looking at O-line too, or defender, like a pass rusher. But I do think the value for Odunze, I understand why they did it. It was just too good to pass up. I didn't think they would, because maybe they would have been like, nah, we just can't. But I think the more that I think about it, the more I kind of liked it and the upside there. And they're going to be a really interesting team next year. Like, could this be the Texans of next year? For sure. Like 100% could, because I don't think the Vikings will make the playoffs. It's just they're going to have a tough division with the Lions and the Packers. But NFC South, they're going to have their one team that'll make it. I think the Eagles will make it, but after that, Giants, Commanders, even the Cowboys downgraded a ton. I still think the Cowboys could make it, but 49ers are a shoo-in, and I do love the Rams. I wouldn't be surprised. You obviously have new teams. Just look it up. Go look at the past years. There are always new teams that make the playoffs, at least a few. I think the Bears, I wouldn't be surprised if they did. I'm not saying they will, but they'll be in the conversation for sure. We'll have our prediction stuff out later. Me and Mathis go through it. We did it the start of this year as well. But love the pick. Just got to be an A for me. Then we have J.J. McCarthy to the Vikings, and this is a B+. I think I like how they did not have to trade up. Now, they went up one spot, but they did that just so that maybe the Raiders or the Broncos or another team didn't jump them and go ahead and trade with the Jets. So that's why they did the trade up to 1. Again, he's a risky prospect. Obviously, we don't know a ton about him, but why not? He's super young. You can mold him into like whatever you want. I mean, he has good size. He's a little bit slender, but obviously all the intangibles teams really loved, his competitiveness, leadership, and he's very young. And I think Sam Darnold could start the entire year. I think it's possible because the stuff around is just phenomenal. And that's why I'm going to give it a B+, because I'm so confident that if he steps in, I don't think he could just be so bad because the stuff around him is awesome. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, Christian Darrisaw, and Brian O'Neill as tackles on the outside. They have Aaron Jones. Now they might need to get a running back maybe when JJ is ready to start officially. By the time that happens, it might be it might be Aaron Jones last year, just as a running back that's very productive in general because he is older. But I still think it's good. I'm glad they took him there. It makes sense. I'm going to give it a B+. It's a B+ because it's not crazy value, and he's not the 10th best player. But quarterback is a highly valued position, and he is going to have to sit, so that's why. But I still think it's good. I think Vikings fans should be happy. B+. Next, we're going to go to Olu Fashanu out of Penn State. And I can't believe the Jets actually made a smart pick. I'm glad they did this over Bowers. I know Bowers would have been awesome, but I just think this was the smarter pick. I'm going to give it an A-. I think they just have to look and be like, hey, what went wrong last year? What was the reason we lost? Oh, yeah. Our tackle got beat 3 times in a row. Rodgers got sacked, I think, on the first 2 plays, or maybe it was the first play. And then the next one, he got sacked again, and boom, he's out for the entire season. Like, they leveraged a ton and gave up so much for Rodgers. He's the best quarterback they've had in so long. They just needed to find protection for him. I think they could get receivers later if they really wanted to. And Garrett Wilson is still there, and he's a stud. The defense is awesome. They did sign Mike Williams, which is why I still think you need a receiver because Mike Williams is a shoo-in to be injured. But their tackles were also a shoo-in to be injured. They signed 2 older, 33, I think, plus-year-old tackles. So they still needed to get some sort of good tackle, a young tackle, I think, in the building because he's going to have to play. There will be times that Morgan Moses or Tyrone Smith will potentially be injured and not play because they're older. So I do think it is good that they have them. And obviously those guys, one of them or both of them will only be there for 1 year. So this is both a now and a future pick. So I do like it. It's not crazy value, but I'm going to give it an A-. Next is Bo Nix to the Broncos. Now, some people didn't like this, and they obviously gave it C's or whatever. And they're like, oh, this is bad or whatever. I'm going to give it a B-, though. I think this is, fine. This is, I would have liked him to trade back, but it seems like in hindsight that wouldn't have been able to happen, and a team would have potentially gotten him. That's kind of what the potential thing was, and maybe a team just wasn't looking to trade up. We don't really know how far they would have gone, but I would have liked if they would have been able to trade back. But it's a B- anyways because they needed a quarterback. They just needed one, and I don't think Bo Nix is as really bad as people saying. I think he is a starting caliber quarterback in the NFL. He's like a Brock Purdy type, which if you have a great team around you, you can be successful like Brock Purdy is. And Brock Purdy is not as good as a lot of people think, and it's kind of shrouded in people's view because of the good team around him. And that's kind of what Bo Nix could be. That's kind of the vibes he gives off. He's a good runner, short, kind of obviously passer, but plays within the structure of the offense, is mobile. I think it's pretty good with what Sean Payton wants. He wanted a guy that's obviously ready to play right now. He couldn't deal with a guy who needs to develop, and that's Bo Nix. He played the most games ever by a quarterback in college history, and it worked for him. He got much better throughout his time in college because I know at Auburn he wasn't great. This is a different quarterback. It just is off the tape. So he's good, but he's going to need a good team around him to be good. And right now, I don't think the Broncos offense is really scaring anyone. So they might be picking high next year, and I hope that if they do, they don't just give up immediately, because I think this can be a guy that could still be there when they start building their team out, and maybe when they get to a point where his contract ends and they have a good team, maybe they're like, hey, we don't really want to just pay him all this money depending on what it is, or maybe they could pay him even less because maybe he hasn't been crazy because the team around him hasn't been good, and then with that lower salary, they can end up being super good. But they're going to have a lot of draft picks, obviously, to do that because the cap hit they took was crazy, and they don't have a ton of draft picks. So, I know the future is kind of scary for them over there, but this pick in general, it's fine. It's solid. They needed a quarterback. He's not as bad as people think. I do think it's a B-. Next is a shocker before the draft, for sure, if you told me this was going to happen. Brock Bowers to the Raiders at 13. I'm going to give this an A+, though. I think it's just really great value. He is like a hybrid receiver tight end in this offense. Michael Mayer was a tight end they took last year. I do still really like him. I think he'll still 100% be involved because they can run 2 tight end sets, and Bowers can be a slot. He just can. And he, like I said, he can play inline or slot. He's a phenomenal receiver. He's a generational tight end. They're just not as valued as much, I guess, but a lot of successful teams have tight ends. I think they had other needs that were more pressing, but I think it was just too good to pass up the value, I think, for them, and they're kind of shocked he was there. Maybe he could have fallen because we had him maybe going to the Colts, but the Colts maybe kind of would have had to trade up with the, Broncos. So, not shocked that didn't happen, but that was what we were thinking. But Bowers to the Raiders, I like it. It's great value. He was much better than the 13th player. That's an A+. Next is Tbilisi Fuanga, and I'm going to give this one an A-. This is just a good pick. I really liked him. They needed O-line. They had their O-line retire, James Hurst, recently. Obviously have the issues with Ryan Ramczyk. Trevor Penning has not been good at all. They needed a tackle. It's a good pick. He's a great run blocker. He is a better pass blocker, in my opinion, than I think a lot of people think. His tape was the second best of any player, or not of any player, of any tackle in the class, and he was the 4th tackle taken. So I think that's really good value. I'm going to go ahead and give it an A-. It wasn't insane, obviously, but it was a good pick. It's what they needed, A-. Then we get to the Colts and the first defensive player off the board, and it was Laiatu Latu out of UCLA, and I'm going to give this one an A. This was the best pass rusher in the class. He is ready right now. His medicals seem good. He had that neck issue 2 years ago, has played every game since, and it seems like there was no sort of issue there after that. Obviously, I do think corner was a bigger need, but he was the best on the board. And pass rusher wasn't like this thing that they were completely full at. Like, he can come in and be insanely productive right away. And the Colts re-signed a ton of their players, and it seems like they want to try and win right now and be good with their rookie. Obviously, that depends on how Richardson does. They spent a very high pick on him, so we'll see how he turns out in year 2. But the Colts also had some great stuff later on. I think if they can get a good cornerback in round 4, this might be one of the best drafts of any team, maybe the best for Indianapolis, because they had some great picks later on in the class. But for this one right here, I like it. He's a stud. I'm going to give it an A. Next is Byron Murphy, and I'm going to give this one an A-. He is also a stud, but this is kind of BPA again. I think they had needs at other positions, especially offensive line. I was kind of sure this is Troy Fautanu, but Murphy, they seemed to really like him, and they ended up taking him here. I think they did pay Leonard Williams a lot of money on the interior, but Murphy can still play alongside him. I think the grade for me went higher after they did get a guard in the second round. So I did bump it up a little bit to A-, but I think he is obviously a great pass rusher from the interior. He's good versus the run. He's a good third down player. I think, they could have gone BPA. I think other people thinking that he was like the 8th or 9th best player in the class, I don't believe that. I'm not as on board with that, but at 16, I definitely am. Only reason it's not an A is because I do think they just had other, like 2 or 3 other pressing needs that they could have addressed, but he's still very good, going to be a stud, A-. We have got just with Latu and down, going to be a lot of good grades for these next few picks, and that's also going to be the case for Dallas Turner. Going to be an A for me for the Vikings. They did give up a 3 and a 4 next year, so that's why it's not an A+. But he's a young pass rusher, has high ceiling. I think he fits the, just kind of road this team is going down. They got their young future quarterback and pass rusher. Again, it's only an A because they had to trade, but he wasn't as consistent. He didn't have as much production as other guys, so I think it's good that Latu went ahead of him because I do think he's a better prospect. But Dallas Turner is super young. He's much younger than Latu. JJ super young at quarterback. If this works out, this will be the great building block for the Vikings team if we look in the future. And either way, I do still think this is great value for both the guys they got, but especially for Dallas Turner. So it'll be an A for me. Another A goes to the Bengals, Amarius Mims. Similar to the Jets, I'm so glad that they're smart with this because they have to look. What was the problem last year? Why did we not win? Because your quarterback was injured. Your quarterback was injured, and you need to protect him at all costs. I think the injury had happened on his own, but he was getting banged up a ton, and it doesn't help if he's getting hit, even if an injury doesn't happen on the play. I know it's hard to predict injuries, but you want to minimize them as much as possible, and just giving him time in the pocket I think is huge and the biggest priority for this team. I know they lost some defenders, but I do love Amarius Mims. Amarius Mims at 18 compared to J.C. Latham at 7, it's just so much better value. It just is. It's not an A+ because it wasn't like a holy crap steal. This is kind of around where he was ranked. But just love him. Didn't have a ton of – he's not raw. He's just inexperienced. He looked very good. He just didn't play a ton of games, only 9 games. I think he played a different position beforehand. He's crazy athlete for his height and speed, or his height and weight. He's huge, but a very good athlete. I love this pick. A for me for the Bengals. Then we get to the Rams, Jared Verse, another A for me. They need sack production for sure after losing Aaron Donald, and this was just right where his value was. Pretty perfect. I think it's a position of need. He was the best player at that position of need. Newton also could have been a good pick, but he fell, so it seems like there's some issues or concerns with his injury there. Verse is older, but there's not really any questions with him. He's going to be a very good starter for them. And again, they need sack production, pass rush production. And they have a lot of younger guys now, and all of them are going to try and come together and try and make up for the stuff that Aaron Donald is leaving with. But I think it makes sense. I like it. I'm going to give it an A. Another great pick here next, the Steelers with Troy Fautanu. And this is going to be an A+ for me. I thought he could have gone higher. I thought he should have gone higher. He can play guard and tackle. It was a position of need for them. It's a perfect A+. They needed O-line help. He's potentially going to play tackle first and maybe kick inside. They also used another pick on the offensive line. So a part of the team that was really lacking and looking worrisome got so much better overnight. And I think the Steelers had a great second and third round as well, addressing other needs. So I love this pick. I think he's great. This is an A+. Then we take a little bit of a gap with the A+ and A's because I'm going to give Chop Robinson a C, the so far second lowest grade of the first round. And, you know, he has a high ceiling, obviously, but this, I think, in terms of the draft, was his ceiling of like the highest he would go. So that's obviously not the greatest value if you're drafting a player at their peak at around like the end of the first round, especially when this player could have gone lower. Now, he probably would have gone to the Bucs, in my opinion, but I still think that it was, at least for the Dolphins, it's not bad per se, but there was other stuff that I think I would have looked at. He's a big boomer bust. Big boomer bust prospect. He's a crazy athlete. Obviously, I think the reason it's a C is because a lot of times with the first round, you don't want to have that much like just big boomer bust prospects go. And you don't want to take those guys super early because you're really hedging your bets there. But that's kind of what they're doing here with this pick. He really does not know just a pass rush move in general. He just tries to beat him with his athleticism. But he is a phenomenal athlete. He's an insane athlete, like very good. So that's kind of the upside there. I just think if you look at the Dolphins, they traded for Chubb, gave up a high pick, and then paid Bradley Chubb. They used a first-round pick on Jalen Phillips. They paid Shaquille Barrett. Obviously, that's only for 1 year. And now they're spending another first-round pick on Chop Robinson. I just don't love of like, hey, we're using all this capital on the pass rushers and we're not getting the production in return that we're paying this capital for. Now, I do think it's good that he's going to a team where he doesn't need to start right away. He could develop and learn from a lot of these guys, so that's very good, and that could help this grade go higher. So maybe if you want to say that, you could move it up to a C+. That's good. I could see that. But I'm just going to go C because I do think there were other positions I would have liked. Like offensive line, or hey, I guess if they wanted Worthy, I know a lot of people were kind of interested in that, and like, hey, just kill him with speed. Why not? You know, I don't see why not. I wouldn't have loved the value, and it wouldn't have been a responsible pick, but I might have liked it a little bit over, or I definitely would have liked it more than Chop Robinson. So he could still be good, could still totally be a stud. I think it's just risky. And you're spending a lot on pass rusher, and it's, you know, just an interesting pick. We'll say that. So a C for the Dolphins. Then we're back to the A+s. I don't know how Howie Roseman does it every year. I think he's just the best GM in the entire NFL. This is an A+. This is an A+. I was shocked he fell this far. If you've been following this channel at all, you know this is my favorite corner in the class, number one. One of my favorite players. I think he can be Sauce Gardner-like instant impact right away. He's going to produce. He's a phenomenal athlete, had insane production. I don't think there's a ton of flaws in his game at all. I think the only thing you could say is the competition, but if that is even like just not even thought about, and you just look at the player and the traits and the production and the athleticism, he's better than the 22nd best player. He just is. And the Eagles were looking about trading up for him, and they didn't even need to. Or they were trading up maybe for a different player like Arnold. They didn't even need to. They could just stay there at 22 and get him. It's phenomenal value, a position of need, and a great player. Everything perfect. A+. Great job, Eagles. And then we go to Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU to the Jags. And I'm going to give this one a B+. I think it's a B+ because of the trade. So they traded down the Vikings. That was when they went up to get Dallas Turner. So I'm moving it up for the Jags because they probably could have taken this guy at 17. So instead of a B, it's a B+. I think they are really messing around with a lot of receivers. Obviously the Ridley thing didn't really work out for them. They signed Gabe Davis. It seems like Zay Jones is kind of the odd man out in this group of guys, but it does give them something they didn't have, and that's a good deep threat because that is what Brian Thomas Jr. is. He's a very good deep threat, and I think Trevor really wants to get that ball down the field, and that's kind of what he needed. But I thought another corner would have been a better pick. That's just my opinion. I do think that they had a higher need at corner, and after the second round, they did get a corner, but it was much later, and it's a slot corner. So I think their downfall, if we look at what was the issue for the team, it was not that obviously their offense wasn't good enough. I think it's going to be that their defense just wasn't great, especially the secondary. And I think maybe that could be the case with who they had here because they were good corners on the board still. If Arnold was there, I thought they were going to take him. Or if they like Kool-Aid or they like Wiggins or someone like that. I think they should have taken a corner, but that doesn't mean this wasn't a good pick because the player is very good. He's very good, and they're going to use him, hopefully, and he will obviously it'll look much better when they have less receivers in the room. But I'm going to give it a B+. I'm going to give it a B+. Then we have the Lions. They traded up for the guy that they had sought out, and that's Terrion Arnold. I'm surprised he fell as well, and this is going to be an A-, and it's only an A- because they had to give up a third. I would give it an A if they did not have to give up a third-round pick because it was kind of high, but I think for the player, not necessarily the position at 24, going up from 29 to 24, but just going, or 28 to 24, but just going up to get this player, I think it would be worth the position they were at, a third-round pick. It was obviously a position of need. He fell. He is a physical man-to-man corner, just exactly what Detroit Lions just love to do. He's a perfect Lions corner. But he did fall probably because of his speed. He didn't run as fast as people thought, and speed is obviously very important. But I think they'll be fine if you just maybe keen in on that and get like a safety potentially on his side occasionally. If it's like on obvious deep downs, then there will be no issues. But he's physical. He's good in coverage, both man and zone. He can tackle. Just not as good of an athlete as Quinyon was. But still, they needed help there. I think it's good. And again, it would be an A. It's an A- because of the trade, but still another good Lions first round. And just draft that I like. We'll see the rest of their draft, obviously. They didn't have a ton of picks later on, but I think it was worth it going up and getting a guy who can start right now. Because now that team, the holes are getting filled, and they're looking more and more like they don't have a ton of needs. Then we had the Packers. They went up and actually took an O-lineman in the first round, which is kind of not shocking, but interesting. I remember there were a lot of Packers fans that were up, like, no, why would they don't ever take an O-lineman? Like, why are you taking an O-lineman when I had Graham Barton to them? Well, stuff happens, and that's why. Just because a guy doesn't take a player the whole time, like the Eagles with a corner, maybe it's because they never needed to. But Jordan Morgan, I'm going to give it a B. I think people were obviously clowning the guy on the TV and just Packers fans, but it's just because they don't know the player. That's all. Like, you can't. This isn't just 7-on-7. I think a lot of people think that. They just don't know who the players are, so they hate them. That's literally it. I wanted to grade this higher because I did really like him, but it just seemed a tad too high. But I still think it's fine. He's not going to be a star, but just a really good pass blocking tackle. And I think they obviously had Zach Tom and Elton Jenkins, but those guys can move around, and Tom and and Morgan can be on each end. And I think after having Bakhtiari, who could just never stay on the field, Morgan is as consistent as they come. He's started a lot, and he's a win now, at least player for a team that wants to win right now, and that's the Packers. Because, yes, they have a lot of young players, but they just want a playoff game. Their quarterback, they're going to have to pay. And I can't remember if they have or not. Sorry off the top of my head, but he obviously sat all those years. So contract going to be up for a quarterback already. So I think getting good players right now is good. So I really want to give it a B+. I really, really do. But we'll stick with a B. We'll stick with a B for now. It's good. Still a good pick. Just wasn't insane value, but I do like it. Then we had Graham Barton to the Bucks. Will probably play center, and I'm going to give it an A. I think this is great value. I think he's an immediate good center. They need a center. Their interior offensive line sucked. All the pass rushers kind of went ahead of them. Robinson maybe could have been someone they would have taken, but I wouldn't have loved that. I think this is a much better pick for them. He's a good run and pass blocker. He's athletic. He's relatively young, but he's also just like going to be a good starting center immediately. This is a very good pick. Love the value. A for the Bucks. Good job. Then we have the Arizona Cardinals' second pick, and it's Darius Robinson, edge rusher out of Missouri. And I'm going to give this one a C+. He is versatile. He can play like defensive tackle on a 4-3 and like defensive end on a 3-4. But he's not a great athlete, at least what you would kind of hope or expect. And it just felt high. I'm kind of surprised he got invited to the draft. I was thinking during the moment when he wasn't going, I'm like, well, no other team is going to need Robinson, so either someone's going to trade up for him or the Cardinals kind of might just take him now, because I'm kind of shocked he got invited to the draft, and I think a lot of people, just a lot of NFL people were higher on him in terms of like scouts and GMs and stuff than a lot of the consensus was, in the media, but just seemed a little high. He doesn't have a really low floor or a high ceiling. He's solid edge who is versatile, but it just seemed like he went too high. So we'll give that one a C+. Then we have one of the more interesting picks of the class that a lot of people were like, oh my God, what are you doing, Bills? And that is the Chiefs trading up to get Xavier Worthy at 28. I'm going to give it a B, though. I know people are higher on him, but I think they're kind of just clouded in the 40 time. Like, just as a prospect, he's not really a first-round receiver. Like, there's just much better and more refined players at receiver than Xavier Worthy, and he also had some drop issues in college. But, I think this is probably the best spot he could have gone. I mean, like this or Miami, like it couldn't have been much better. So that's a pretty great thing for them. And just, I love how the Bills are just willing to go down and let other teams trade up to get guys that they want, who they literally have to try and beat. Like, it's going to be all over the place now of if Xavier Worthy does anything good against the Bills, it'd be like, well, you gave it to him. So that's kind of funny. But his rookie year is probably going to be disappointing because he's going to be a little inconsistent because he is more raw. And they literally have Marquise Brown, who's like a very similar player. So they basically drafted the same thing. But Marquise Brown's only on a one-year deal. I don't think they're going to keep him forever. Maybe it'll just be this 1 year. And after that, Worthy's second year could probably be very good. And I honestly want to change this to a B+. I'm going to change it on the fly to a B+, because I do think this was the best possible scenario he could have gone to. They did have to trade up for him, but this was a great spot for him. He's more raw than people think, so that's why it's not crazy, but it's a very good grade, B+. We got four more here, with the first one being Tyler Guyton, tackle out of Oklahoma, and I'm going to give this one a B-. They did trade down, so instead of like a C or a C+, I think it should be a B- because they could have taken him at the place that they were at. Obviously, I have not been as big of a fan of Guyton. I think the Cowboys, obviously they did need offensive line, but I think just he's older. He is still raw, which an older and raw player. Like, that doesn't sound great. He's not a crazy athlete either. He's going to need to start right now. So I don't love all that stuff, but I think the Cowboys are the perfect team he could have gone to because they really know how to draft and develop O-linemen. So if this wasn't the Cowboys, if this was higher, if they didn't trade down, this could have been like a C, maybe even a C minus. But I think with them trading down, with it being the Cowboys and all that stuff, I'm going to boost it up a little bit and give it a B minus. But just know it's a very volatile B minus. And it's a reluctant B minus because I think this could easily be a C or a C plus. But it is the Cowboys. If there's one thing they can do, it's develop O-line. So I'll trust them on this one and see how it goes. Then we have the Ravens. Pick 30. They got Nate Wiggins out of Clemson, cornerback. And I'm going to give this one an A minus. I think it's a high upside. He did fall for a reason, though. He is not durable at all. He can't tackle. He's very thin. But he's crazy fast for a corner, and he was great in coverage. Honestly, his coverage kind of rivaled that of Mitchell and Quinton Mitchell and Terrion Arnold. It was very good, but the medicals, do concern you because he's just been injured a lot, and he's very thin, and apparently some of his interviews weren't amazing, so that's why he fell. But the Ravens have had a history of not really caring about a lot of the injury stuff. They kind of just take good players if they feel like they're good, and I think at 30, he could have gone much higher, and the corners just fell in general. So with that, I do think it's very good value, and they got guys that maybe they would have taken at this pick because a lot of the tackles were gone. I don't think there was another tackle worthy of taking in the first round. So they got some tackles later, which was good. So I like it. I think it's an A minus. Then we get to one of the more surprising picks, I would say, of the first round. Not for the player, but for the team. And that's Ricky Pearsall out of Florida. I definitely didn't expect him to go in the first round, but if you watched my studs and steals video or watched any of my draft just mocks talking about him, I love this player. I think he was around this range. I don't think this is a reach for Ricky Pearsall. I think people hating it just don't know who he is. They just don't. And that's pretty simple. They just have not studied the player at all, and they just want to find a player to hate. That's basically it. The Niners, I do think the only thing that's making this, it's a B plus, by the way, B plus for this grade. The only thing that's making it, not higher or questionable, obviously, is because the situation at wide receiver. And, are they going to trade someone? Because they didn't trade anyone on day 2. So I don't think there will be a trade on day 3. And it seems more and more like the trade window may have been missed. But even then, if it's missed, this is still a combination of Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. This is a combination of the two. So they can all coexist together. Pearsall, Ayuk, and Deebo. In the future, could one of them be traded? Yeah, probably. The Niners tend to like to plan for the future and make sure they got their guys in check. And this is an awesome receiver. I think a lot of people that don't like this pick are going to look pretty dumb because he's going to be insane. He's going to make some crazy stuff happen. Even if it's not year 1, if it's a little clogged, I think year 2 or maybe when they get rid of one of the receivers, if they can't afford to pay them all, he's going to look awesome. He's going to be a stud. He doesn't have the highest ceiling ever, but his hands are great. He's made some awesome contesting catch situations. I just think he's very good. I think he's very good, and this was not a reach. I don't think it was. It's not a steal or anything, obviously. It's not a steal. But it's around the range where I think he could have gone. And just in terms of ranking receivers, him being the 7th or whatever receiver he was, 8th receiver. Yeah, that's around where I had him. So I think this is a good pick. I'll give it a B+. And then as a shocker to me, my team, the Carolina Panthers, they ended up trading into the first round. The Bills moved all the way out, made 2 different trades. I think the Panthers really wanted to go up because they wanted to get the 5th-year option and make sure maybe no one sniped their guy, who Leggett said they were going to take him. I think it was true, and they were kind of like, oh, no, definitely not. They were probably told him that. I don't think they told any other guys that. And they got Xavier Leggett out of South Carolina, and I'm going to give this one an A-. Again, I do think they got up there to get the 5th-year option, which is good. They didn't trade really a ton at all for it. And it fits the mold of the kind of receiver they need. I do love, obviously, Ladd McConkey and guys like that, but they already have Deontay Johnson and Adam Thielen, who's like on his last leg, obviously. But Deontay Johnson, they just traded for, and he's like a smaller receiver, good route runner. But that's like they'd have two of the same receiver. I think Leggett is the guy they didn't really have. He is older, but he's a great deep threat, very athletic, good with yards after catch. He's not as good of a contested catch guy as you would think, but he's still a good deep threat, and he's tall, very built, deep threat. And the Panthers didn't really have a deep threat. There was a point in time where Bryce just stopped looking deep because he, one, didn't have time, and two, didn't really have a guy that would get open to go deep. Now, I will say he's not a great separator, so that's a little bit concerning. And like no one honestly on the team is. That was the biggest thing with Mingo. Wasn't a great separator. Thielen isn't a great separator. I think Deontay Johnson is the best separator on the team. So he will probably be the number one option, Deontay Johnson. But I think Leggett will produce immediately. And I think this price shows that they don't really believe in Mingo at all, which maybe seems to be a wasted pick now, which would be another second-round wide receiver the Panthers drafted, and just nothing happened. Didn't work out. Obviously, Terrace Marshall before. So that's kind of concerning and upsetting. But I do think under this new regime, who I've liked every move they made so far. They made one move I freaking hated, and that was the linebacker they drafted in the third round, if you know that pick. But all the other stuff I've liked. Again, we'll have a full draft breakdown because I've followed and went through so much stuff, so I'll have some great real draft grades for you guys. But I like it. I think it's good. I'm going to give it an A- because I think him being, like, again, if you're just ranking like he was the blank receiver taken, like in the lower, single digits at the end of the first, that was his range. He totally could have gone there, and it's reasonable. And a lot of the times with the middle receivers, it's like, just who do you prefer? Like Jalen Polk went pretty early. He was getting there were a lot of multiple different scouts and just analysts that I follow that seemed to really like Polk, and I think said, hey, this is just a really good receiver too. And he went to the Patriots, and like, hey, that could just fit what they need more, So I think it just fit the kind of receiver that they needed, and I like it. So we'll give it an A-. And that'll be the first round draft grades. That is all. Thank you so much for watching. I obviously, if you want to maybe see the mocks, kind of what was potentially going through my head and what I would do mock, that's the mock, I believe 2.0 is the what I would do mock. Go check that out. In my studs and steals video, you can still learn a lot about these players and see who I liked and who I thought is a steal, maybe who's still on the board. And then we will have a full draft grades video. I already went through personally and graded the second and third round, so I will get, the fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh round. I'm going to be sitting watching it. Yes, I will, because I followed all these players. I loved them. I loved just doing the draft, just stuff. Like, I loved learning about the players and just seeing who I liked, gaining opinions. That was really fun for me this year. And the draft was awesome, like it always is. It's a great time. So, again, smash like if you enjoyed. Go ahead and subscribe. Check out Mathis NFL. That's probably where most of you are from. My good friend. I did some videos with him over there, and we will do more in the future. We do an annual quarterback rankings video. That'll be very exciting. We'll predict the season. We've already been having different agreements and disagreements about teams that we think will be better or quarterbacks we think are better. So that'll be some fun videos there. But that'll be all for me. So as always, stay smart, stay sharp, and I will see you guys later. Peace.